So what we'll do is maybe we'll have a brief overview of all the four different domains on Shabbos, and then we'll try during the Kitzur and see how we can follow. Okay, so we'll say the main two. The main two are Reshus HaYochid. Now, they often translate as a private domain, but although that might be an accurate translation of the words, it doesn't mean what we would imagine it to mean. In other words, when we say private domain in English, we're thinking of ownership. But a private domain could be publicly owned. Reshus HaYochid. In other words, the definition is its structure. So it has to be at least 10 tefachim high. Just to remind everyone, this is a tefach, right? Not threatening anyone, God forbid, right? That the width of the fist is a tefach. Has to be 10 tefachim high. We'll say approximately 40 inches. And it has to be at least 4 by 4 tefachim in area. So it could be a pillar. If it's that big, the top of it is Reshus HaYochid. It could be a stadium. You know, if it's surrounded, we say 10 tefachim high, either it is 10 tefachim high off the ground or its walls 10 tefachim high. So any fence, you know, I think what's about 40 inches, you know, let's say, well, depends who, but let's say around belly button height. You know, let's say many people, a little bit more, a little bit less. So that's how high the fence has to be. So if it's completely fenced, you know, we'll get to partly fenced and different things later. But in concept, if it's completely fenced, it's 4 by 4 tefachim wide. That's its area, and its fence is 10 tefachim high or low. Right, you can have a fence can go down. You know, like if you're on the top of a plateau or something, you know, you got a cliff face going down, then that's a Reshus HaYochid. So again, although we translate as private domain, it's got nothing to do with the ownership, but it's privately, publicly owned, whether it belongs to the city. It's its dimensions. So in concept, Manhattan, right, New York City, would be a Reshus HaYochid because it's completely surrounded by the water and just drops down. You know, in practice, because you have so many people there, and we're going to discuss the amount of people, well, 600,000 people. We'll discuss this. We'll get to that. You know, traveling through it each day, that nullifies its Reshus HaYochid status. So that's Reshus HaYochid. Again, so it's an area that's at least, this is a tefach, right? At least 4 by 4 tefachim square. If it's round, has to be the fit 4 tefachim. It has to be the fitted in the circle, inside the circle. So it's, which means it'll be closer to 6 tefachim diameter. And it has to be surrounded by some type of fence, either up or down, 10 tefachim high. So that's the Reshus HaYochid. Yes. You're muted.
Why do they say private domain and not singular domain or individual domain? It would explain it better, maybe.
I'm not sure why they translated that way. All the translations seem to say private. I think as we get used to the terms, we'll just avoid translating it. Okay. We'll just say Reshus HaYochid, because I think, you know, anyone who's bilingual will know there's a lot of words that don't, you know, transfer from one language to another language with exact meaning. The next big one is Reshus HaRabim, which again they translate as public domain. However, again, it's not talking about its ownership. because you could, in theory, have Rosh Hashanah that's privately owned, even by an individual. So again, it's its dimensions. So its dimensions means that it's not fenced. Essentially, it's an open area. It doesn't have any fencing around it. It's, let's say, like our cities today. Most people don't live in walled cities. Some of us live in walled, complexes, apartment complexes, and various things. So we'll speak about that a little bit later. But a regular open city, that's a Rosh Hashanah. In theory, because it has to have other ingredients as well. So it has to be 16 amas square. So an amma is from the elbow to the fingertip. It's about 48 centimeters. I'm not sure what that is in feet. See, in Australia, we don't use feet. I mean, we do the walk, but not in measurements. If you ask an Australian how many feet in a yard, they'll tell you it depends how many people are standing in the yard. They won't realize that you're actually talking about a measurement, right? That's how it goes. So it's 16 by 16 amas, and it's not closed in. So let's use.
What about the height?
Sorry?
Is it the height is the same?
Well, it's not closed in, so it doesn't have a fence.
Oh.
So it doesn't have a fence. So, one of these big roads in Manhattan, New York City, again, would be an example, because to be a real Rosh Hashanah, according to most views, you need 600,000 people a day. Right? So when the Jews traveled in the wilderness, the width of the camp was 16 amas as they traveled along the road. And they had 600,000 people. So that's the definition. So they're the main two. Now, the biblical prohibition is you can't transport something from a Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah or vice versa. That's the biblical prohibition. So loosely, we'll say from this private domain to the public domain. So let's give a very simple example. Let's not speak about most of the roads that we live on, because we'll come back to them later. But if you had a street, again, let's say like in New York City, where there's 600,000 people every day on it. Some of those roads, at lunchtime, you might have 1 million people on the road at once, at the actual moment. So let's say you had a house that the door opened onto that street. So your house, presumably, the walls of your house are at least 40 inches high, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't be a very comfortable house. You had lower walls than that. So your walls, presumably your house is more than 4 by 4 tefachim, right? Although probably that would, in Manhattan, would cost more than most of us could afford anyway, if it only was those dimensions. But let's presume that, so you have a regular house, so that house is going to be Rosh Hashanah, and you can't carry from the house into the street, which is Rosh Hashanah, or the other way around. So they're the main two domains, and that's the malachim. Now we have another two domains. The next one is a carmelis. Now we don't really speak about a carmelis today, because rabbinically we treat it like Rosh Hashanah. So let's give an example of a carmelis. So again, I'm not sure exactly where everyone lives, but on the street that I live on, even though it's a main road, you don't have 600,000 people go on that street. Right, so it's 16 amas wide, right? It has all the dimensions. It has every other ingredient, we'll say, to be a Rosh Hashanah, but you don't have the amount of people. So therefore, it's a carmelis. Right? So Carmelis is any Rishis Rabbim that's missing an ingredient or missing a factor. So again, I'm just giving an example of missing the factor of the amount of people, but it could be other factors. Maybe it's not quite big enough, or so sorry, just letting someone in. So anything that looks like Rishis Rabbim, but it's missing some of the criteria, or one criteria, missing something. That's called a Carmelis. Now, Doraisa, from a Torah prohibition perspective, you can carry from a Carmelis to either a Rishis Rabbim or a Rishis Yochid. However, rabbinically, we said we can't. Why? Because what's going to happen if you can carry from my house to my street, then I won't realize when I go to the next street, which maybe is a main road that has 600,000 people, that I can't keep carrying. I think I can carry in and out. Or, I'll move to another house, or someone will visit me, I'll visit them and won't realize. It's so similar. It's so similar to, how do you tell one road from another road? So since they're so similar to each other, so rabbinically we can't carry in a Carmelis. So we treat it like Rishis Rabbim. So in our day-to-day conversations, we'll probably even call it a Rishis Rabbim, even though it's technically not. The fourth domain, it's called a Mokum Patur, and it's essentially any other space that doesn't fit in the other three categories. So it could be 10 tefachim high, like Rishis Rabbim, but too small. Or that would probably be the most common one. So if you had, let's say, a pillar in a Rishis Rabbim in the public domain, and this pillar is 10 tefachim high, but it's not 4x4 square in surface on top. So it's too small. That would be a good example. Pillar or pole, something like that. So they're the four. Any questions on that before we
What's the name of number 4?
Makom Patur. Literally means the place where you're not obligated. Right? In other words, it doesn't have the restrictions of the other places. So although we'll discuss it more in the following chapter, but I'll just mention that generally speaking, when we set up a community Eruv, we rely on a lot of leniencies. So let's say, for example, the way they use, let's say, the electricity poles or something, they put wires across, essentially making door frames, shape of a door frame. I have two pillars and a beam, although it's a wire, but essentially a beam going across. And we make a wall full of doorways. So the reason that we are lenient to be able to do that is because it's not a real Rishis Rabbim. It's actually a Carmelis. Right? Because most of us don't live in a place where there's 600,000 people or more traversing that area. So we're going to say, so it's a Carmelis. So biblically, you could actually carry that.
Rabbi,
yes.
is there an English translation for Carmelis?
I don't believe so. I think they generally just translate it as Carmelis. I haven't seen it translated as something. But as you said, it's a Rishis Rabbim, except it's missing something. It's missing one of the requirements of Rishis Rabbim, one or more.
A deficient Rishut Rabbim.
That's it. So when the sages, and we're talking about, sages, again, we're talking about biblical times, but when they made the decree that a Carmelis we're going to treat it like a Rishus Rabbim, they said that we can be quite lenient when it comes to making an Eruv. So the type of Eruv we have today, you can't build, let's say, in Manhattan. You know, maybe if you had a little alley in Manhattan, but I'm talking about, you know, one of these big, you know, like Broadway or something, where you have easily 600,000 people. You know, to do that, you would actually have to put a proper set of gates that close at night. But of course, it's a city that never sleeps, so you wouldn't be allowed to close it. So that's, you know, that's what we have there. All right. Any questions on this before we confuse ourselves in the text? No, we're good. Okay. So chapter 81. It's a Shulchan Aruch code, a bridge version of the Code of Jewish Law. Chapter 81. Abba Rishus the Shabbos. The 4 domains of Shabbos. Okay. Aleph, number 1. Abba Rishus the Shabbos. We have 4 types of domain on Shabbos. And they are Rishus HaYochid. Again, although they translate it as private domain, but it doesn't mean that. As we said, doesn't mean it's private in that it's fenced off, but it's not necessarily privately owned. We have Rishus HaRabim, public domain. Again, that doesn't mean publicly owned. That means because it's unfenced, it's open. So the public can walk through it. They're not stopped from walking through it. We have a Carmelis, which is a Rishus HaRabim missing some details. A Mokum Patur, and we have a place that doesn't really fit into any category. It's our leftover places. And just so they don't feel left out, we give them a name.
Rabbi, I really can't see the difference between number 3 and number Carmelit and Reshut Patur, Makom Patur.
So a Carmelis, let's say for an example, would be a regular street in the city.
Okay.
So it's 16 amos wide. The public can walk through it. It's not closed off. But on a regular street, you know, how many people go on a day? 100? Let's say, I mean, obviously depends on the main road, but you know, it's the regular suburban street. So it has all the other criteria being Rishus HaRabim, except it doesn't have the amount of people. So it's a Carmelis.
Okay.
While a Mokum Patur is lacking
more than one
the
thing.
size. It's lacking the size. So the classic example of Mokum Patur would be the top of a pillar. It's 10 tefachim high. If it would have been 4 by 4 tefachim wide on top, it would be a Rishus HaYochid, but it's not. The average pillar, let's say it's only 2 tefach square. So it doesn't have the dimension. So it's 10 tefachim high, so it's out of the airspace of the Rishus HaRabim, but it's not big enough to be a Rishus HaYochid.
So what does the difference is that it doesn't fit in size to the others.
Yeah, so a Carmelis is still on the ground.
But a Carmelis is also 16 by 16.
But it's on the ground. It's ground level. Mokum Patur is not in the airspace of a Rishus HaRabim. So it's 10 tefachim.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
Rabbi. Would, for example, the tops of a wall made of rocks, for example, that border, for example, some of the areas or some of the farms in Ireland, or perhaps even in New England, where it's wide enough where you can actually stand. It's high enough. It's about 10 tefachim, but it's not. It doesn't have any other characteristics.
I'm going to tell you yes, but no. Meaning, I hear what you're saying, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the reason that it's a no is because since it's walling in, presumably a Rishus HaYochid or something, so the top of the wall belongs to the space. So let's say, for an example, let's just say your home. So let's say you have a fenced-in yard, and you got thick walls even. Now let's say brick, stone walls. So the top of the wall belongs to your Rosh Hashanah. So a wall's not the best example. That's why I gave the example of a pillar. You know, sometimes in a public area, you have a pillar or a statue or a water fountain. Although water fountain's probably 4 by 4 tefachim wide, at least the top. You know, they make a little bowl with it. But let's say it didn't. So something like that. So it's 10 tefachim high, but it's not 4 by 4 tefachim wide. So that's a makom patur.
What if your yard does not have a fence?
So if it's not closed in, then it becomes an extension of the Carmelis or Rosh Hashanah. So again, keeping it simple, let's say your house stops at a certain point of your property. You have a totally open front yard.
Yeah.
And then that goes to the street. Then you couldn't carry in the front yard without making some type of eruv.
I see.
Yes. Suppose that you cut a tree down and you just have the
stump.
The stump itself. That would be makom patur.
Could be. So if it's 10 tefachim high and it's less than 4 by 4 tefachim wide, because if it's 4 by 4 wide, then it becomes a shisa yochid.
Right.
Then it becomes a shisa yochid. If it's but if it's less than 4 by 4, then a stump. Yeah, stump would be an example, or a mound, anything like that. Okay.
So the Reshut Rabim is also supposed to be 10 tefachim high or not?
No, it's ground
No.
level. As a matter of fact, its airspace only goes up to 10 tefachim.
Okay.
Now, one thing we're going to learn is Shisa Yochid, the airspace goes forever. So you keep going to the moon, and it's still in the airspace.
Right.
But a Reshus Harabim, the airspace only goes 10 tefachim high.
Okay.
Okay. So Navar Kitzas Mehem B'Ksara, and we're going to explain these a little bit in short. Okay. Base. A Zahir Reshus Yochid. What is Reshus Yochid? We're going to define it. Makim, it's a place. Shalachol apachas arba tefachim arba tefachim. It's a place that's at least 10 tefachim square. Right? It's at least 10 tefachim square. Shazehu, and if you've got the brackets, not every print does. Shazehu makim choshev shalish tamish boy. Because this is the minimum size to be a place that's considered useful, you know, an area that's usable. So it's at least 4 by 4 tefachim wide. So that's requirement number 1. A mukaf mechitzas gavoyis lechalapachas asara tefachim, and it's surrounded by mechitzas, by walls or partitions of at least 10 tefachim. And in the brackets, afilu eino shleimus legamri, even if they're not totally completed. You know, it could have gaps, you know, it could be lattice, you know, different things. So requirement number 1, 4 by 4 tefachim square. Requirement number 2, it's got fences 10 tefachim high. B'charetz amok asar tefachim, rachav arba tefachim, gam kein dina mechitza. If the fences go down, so let's say you have a ditch. You have a ditch that's 10 tefachim deep, and the bottom of the ditch, or the width of the ditch, is 4 by 4 tefachim, then that's also Reshus Yochid. So the Reshus Yochid can either go up or it can go down. So if you live in a basement, it's also Reshus Yochid. Or it doesn't even have to be a finished basement, you know, even a ditch, hole in the ground. V'chein, likewise, if you have a system, you have a bore, so you have a hole, you know, straight down like a well, as an example. or for storage. People used to make these holes for storage. If it's 10 by 10, so it's 10 deep and 4 by 4 wide, that's also. Likewise, if you have a hill, a mound, right, in the middle of a Shisarabim even, or some type of mound, and the mound is 10 tefachim high and 4 by 4 wide, that also is Rosh Hashanah. But filo kli, and it doesn't have to actually be a landmass, even a keli. Now, keli normally translated as a utensil, but we don't necessarily mean like your pot. Most people, even commercial pots, aren't 10 tefachim high and 4 by 4 tefachim wide. So we don't mean something like that, but you just go, for example, a teva. You have a chest or a closet. So there's some type of thing there. Im gavoya sara, if it's 10 tefachim high, chavish or gula, or if it's a barrel and it's round, and its circumference is large enough that you could fit 4 by 4 square inside it, then kol elo filahem reshus harabim v'kamlis, then these barrel or closet or trunk, even if they're in the middle of reshus harabim or a carmelis, if they're 4 by 4 wide, 10 tefachim high, the chalkus, the atzim, they become a separate entity for themselves. They're reshus yochid and they are reshus yochid.
The bed of a truck, a pickup truck.
Yes.
The back of a pickup truck is a reshus yochid.
If the fencing is 10 tefachim high, I guess you had a
truck.
If
it's
in
elevated,
itself, it should be 10 tefachim off the ground.
If it's elevated.
It's elevated, yeah. So you wouldn't be able to carry from the top to the outside and vice versa. So any of those things. So again, I don't want to keep harping on it, but just to drill it in, the main requirements is that the area space is 4 by 4 tefachim, and the fencing, whether it goes up or down, because it can be a drop, or it can be into the ground, or it can be fenced above the ground, is 10 tefachim high. So that's the reshus yochid. That's the reshus yochid. Loosely the private domain. So again, it's irrelevant who owns it. It can be owned by partners, it can be owned by the community, it can be city property. That's when we say private domain, we don't mean private ownership. We mean that it's private, that it's fenced off. That's the public can't, it's not a thoroughfare. The public can't walk through. That's what I mean. That's what the private means in this case. Now, the other reshus yochid, who reshus yochid, the airspace of reshus yochid is the same as the reshus yochid ad the rakia, until heaven, till the sky. Right. So the airspace just keeps going up. So it's only 10 tefachim high, and you learn to levitate, and there you are 100 feet above it. You can't drop the ball into the reshus harabim. That was a very practical example, wasn't it? But whatever it is, the airspace goes all the way up. Okay, now the walls themselves, and we touched on this before because we had a small discussion about the fences. So the walls of reshus yochid themselves, shemekifas reshus yochid, meaning the walls that surround, that close in.
Rabbi, you froze.
They yard, you can put things onto the top of the fence, take them off the top of the fence, no problems. I'm not talking about a fence that's shared by 2 yards, because then it can be a question which yard it belongs to. Let's say I'm talking about a fence between your property and the reshus harabim. and the street. Right, so the top of the fence belongs to the Rosh Hashanah. Not only the fence, but also any hole. So it could be deliberately made a hole like a cubby, or it just happens to be a crack. You can take things in and out. But now, not only if there's a hole from the inside, but even if it goes all the way through. So in
By wording,
yes.
there's somebody has a question. Susan has a question.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Susan, I think you just have to speak because you can't see all the hands.
Oh yeah, I see it now. Sorry, I was looking in the book, so I
No.
didn't know.
My question is, when you're talking about something, an area that goes all the way up to the sky,
Yeah.
because they made where a cliff was, and then underneath the cliff was they made houses. Is that why they? I mean, I don't understand why they say something is sky high, or in other words, the area it belongs to.
What it means like this. So if we use a simple example, so let's say your backyard. So your backyard fenced in, it's a Rishus Yochid. So the Rishus Yochid goes all the way the airspace forever. So you could throw a ball up in the air, high as you like, and it stays in the Rishus, stays in this Rishus Yochid.
Now I get it.
Yeah, and if you were high up, regardless of the height, and you threw the ball into the street, then we've transferred from Rishus Yochid to Rishus Rabbin.
Okay, I get it now. Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah, no problems. I'm sorry I didn't explain it better before.
No, it's all right.
So we're saying in the fence, even if you had a hole that went all the way through, so from your yard all the way to the street, inside the hole of the fence, and it's irrelevant whether it's deliberately made like a cubby or it just some bricks fell out, whatever it happens to be. This hole, the airspace, belongs to the Rosh Hashanah. So you can put things in there, you can take them out.
Right.
Since they're able to be used. So, if you had so since you're able to use it from the inside, it belongs to the inside.
Okay.
So Harihaim Batalim Etzla, so since you have use of them inside, they become nullified, they just become an extension of the inside. It's not like its own space. Even if it has its own dimensions. Right? It's still part of your space.
Okay.
Now, the imheim rak klapi chutz, if the only way to access this hole is from the outside, no, it's from the street, it's blocked off from the inside, then we're going to explain this in the next halach. Explain this next time. Okay. Now, Gimel, number 3. Any questions, number 2, before we move on? No? Okay. Number 3. Ezer Rishus Rabbin. What is a Rishus Rabbin? So again, we translate Rishus Rabbin as the public domain. It doesn't mean public ownership. It can be privately owned. What it means is the public can travel through. It's like a public thoroughfare. So again, using an example, someone lived on a road that really was a Rishus Rabbin, excuse me, let's say like Broadway and in Manhattan. And not that they have buildings like this on there anymore, but in concept, you had a house that was set back on your property from the street frontage. It's a little bit set back into the property, and there's no fencing. So whoever's walking on the sidewalk, if there's a big crowd, they can just keep overflowing into your yard. Then that yard, even though it's privately owned, becomes part of the Rishus Rabbin. Because the public in this case doesn't mean ownership, it means thoroughfare. And the public are able to go through. So that's what so what is this Rishus Rabbin? It's rechavos, it's streets, shvakim, marketplaces. Shehain sheish esrei amma al sheish esrei amma. 16 ammas. Now, not the tefachim anymore. This was the tefach. Now we're talking about an amma. Ammas from the elbow to the fingertip. So it's 16 ammas by 16 ammas. Quite a bit larger. 4 ammas is approximately 6 feet. So we're talking about approximately 24 feet square. The most streets are 24 feet long, at least, and they're 24 feet wide. The streets, marketplaces that are this size. Now, shekain hayareichav haderech b'machane leviyah shebamidbar, because when the Levium traveled in the midbar, they're the ones who had the wagons that carried the Mishkan. So the wagons were they 2 by 2, side by side. That was how wide they were. So that was the public area. So that's where we learn the width from. And likewise, roads that go from city to city, highways, we'll call them, and any roads that are 16 amos. Hari hein Rishus Rabim, the all are Rishus Rabim. The Chol Dava Shub Rishus Rabim. Now, anything that's in the Rishus Rabim, so we'll just explain this before we say it inside. You can have something else in the Rishus Rabim. So let's say, for an example, we mentioned an exception. We said, let's say you had this big trunk, and it was 10 tefachim high, 4 tefachim square. We say the top of it, even though it's smack bang in the middle of the Rishus Rabim, since it has the dimensions of Rishus Yochid, we say the top is Rishus Yochid. Let's say it didn't have the dimensions. Now we know generally the ground is not 100% smooth. There's little ups and downs. So whether it's the ground going up and down, or there's a rock, or someone put something there, or there's a ditch, any of these things, we say if they're less than 3 tefachim, so less than 3 fists, either up or down, we say they're just like the ground. Because less than 3 tefachim, you just step over it, you walk over, the ground isn't 100% smooth. You have a little bump in the ground, you walk outside and you step over it. Once it's bigger than 3 tefachim, or higher or deeper, we'll discuss that next. But less than 3 tefachim is what I'm going to say. So let's start that sentence again. Now, any object that's in this Rishus Rabim, if it's not 3 tefachim off the ground, so it's less than 3 tefachim. Afilu hokaitzim, even if it's thorns, which normally people try to avoid, or tsoya, or it's manure, which again people try to avoid. They don't like stepping in those things. People don't step on these things. Nevertheless, we say it's nullified to the ground, it's part of the ground, because it's not large enough to be significant. And it's exactly like Rishus Rabim. Well, it's part of the Rishus Rabim. And likewise, a hole. It doesn't have to be an object that's on the ground. It can even be a hole going into the ground. If it's not 3 tefachim deep, then it's just part of the Rishus Rabim. The ground's not 100% smooth. There's little ups and downs, and that's how it goes. Less than 3 tefachim is just regular ground. Next point is now we've got these fences to the private property, and they have holes in them. But the holes in the last halacha, in the last law, we discussed the hole. They had access from the inside. Now we're talking about holes that have an access only from the outside. Now, if they only have holes from the only access from the outside, then it depends. It's going to depend on the dimensions. Right. So, hole in a fence. The Eina Mufaloshim Lifnim Rishus Yochid, and they don't go through into the Rishus Yochid. This game we learned if it does go through, then they become an extension of the Rishus Yochid. The Rishus Yochid can use it because the hole goes all the way through. They belong to Rishus Yochid. It doesn't go through, it's only on the outside. So, Im Haim Namuchim Mishloish Tefachim the Karka, if this hole is within 3 tefachim of the ground level, botlei the gabi Rishus Rabbim. They're just part of the ground. It's an extension of Rishus Rabbim, and you can put things in and out, no problem. There's less than 3 tefachim from the ground, it's just part of the ground. V'hari hank Rishus Rabbim, they're just part of the Rishus Rabbim. Now, that's possibility number 1. Possibility number 2. If they're higher than 3 tefachim, so when they're lower than 3 tefachim, it doesn't matter about the size. They can be 100 feet long, 50 feet deep into the wall. You know, if you've got a wall that thick, doesn't make any difference. The size is irrelevant. If it's less than 3 tefachim off the ground, we just say it's part of the ground. If it's more than 3 tefachim off the ground, now the size makes a difference. So, how does it work? And the doinim we judge them the way which category we make it depends on its measurements. So, option number 1. And here's where it starts to get a little bit confusing because you got several options. Option number 1. Im yesh behem arba la arba. It's 4 tefachim square, the hole. Behem lamata masat tefachim, but it's less than 10 tefachim. So, if it was higher than 10 tefachim, or 10 tefachim or higher, it would be Rishus Yochid, its own Rishus. If it was lower than 3 tefachim, it's part of the ground. So this hole, which is 4 by 4 wide, is between 3 and 10 high. So Hari Haim Carmelis. Then it's a Carmelis. So there's another example of a Rishus Yochid missing an ingredient. In other words, it's in the airspace of Rishus Rabbim missing ingredient, which is the Carmelis. It's in the airspace of Rishus Rabbim, but it doesn't have the measurements, not large enough. It's accessible to all the public. It's separated from the private, but it's not large enough to be the public area. So it's a Carmelis. Well, a Ma'ila Masar Tefachim, but if it was higher than 10 Tefachim in the wall, then have Rishus Yochid, then it becomes a Rishus Yochid. So that's all if it's got an airspace, this hole of 4 by 4. The im ein behem arba la arba. If it doesn't have an airspace of 4 by 4, and it's still 10 tefachim high, so it can't be a Rishus Yochid, it has the height, but it doesn't have the airspace, then it's a mokum patur. All right, how are we going with this, with the measurements? We're following? Yes, maybe?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, fine.
I hope it's clear as water, not clear as mud.
Close.
Close. Chocolate milk.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So,
Rabbi,
yes.
maybe you can get a hold of some diagrams or pictures on the internet and just
Yeah. We should work on that. Or if not, we'll try and draw one. I'll get one of my kids to draw one. You know, I didn't fail art at school, but you know, what wasn't wasn't far off it. You know, in 5th grade, I was cutting something out in class. The teacher says, "What are you doing?" So I said, "You said to cut it out." Says, "I meant with scissors, not your teeth." That was
That
so.
was the beginning of the end. Okay.
That's right. So might have to get someone else to draw it, but maybe we'll try and summarize it. So again, the Carmelis is missing an ingredient from the Shus Rabbim. So here you got this hole in the wall. If it's an extension, all right, I think I'm making it more confusing. We'll just keep going a little bit. Maybe having enough. We get it. Sometimes you get enough data that makes everything fit into place.
What Sif are we on?
Gimel. We're almost towards the end.
In what?
Oh, so we're Simon 8. We're chapter 81.
Pei Aleph?
Yep, Pei Aleph.
In?
3.
And we're in Gimel, in Pei Aleph.
Almost towards the end.
I ask a quick question.
Please.
This is in the Torah?
Yes. Well, the four domains are in the Torah. Okay, so as we said, we gave the definition of the Rishus Harabim was when the Leviim were traveling, when they were carrying the Mishkan, or the parts of it, because they took it apart when they went from place to place.
Oh, now I'm okay. Now it's making more sense. I couldn't understand why all this was so exacting. Now I understand. I'm sorry.
That's okay. So
I'm not thinking that it's I'm thinking current instead of ancient. Now I see what you're talking.
So when they traveled, they had 2 wagons side by side with a gap in between. Anyway, so they that took up 16 amos. So that's like the definition. That was the public thoroughfare.
Right.
And then people lived in tents or whatever, lived in closed off areas. That's the Rishus Hayochid. Now, although the Carmelis is not specifically mentioned, but it's the Rishus Harabim missing a part. Either it's not big enough, or there's not enough people, whatever it is. But it's missing one of the. And likewise, the Mokkah Patur is essentially a Rishus Hayochid missing an ingredient.
Okay.
So
I'm sorry I was so lost. I apologize.
it's okay. When the students are lost, it's the teacher's fault. I should be apologizing. It's a complicated. This is it's quite technical. It's yeah, and even the chart. Let's see how we go. We can get the basic things in the chart, but I think even then there's so many
variables.
Yeah, that's right. So many variables be very hard.
Right.
To put in the chart.
Right.
Okay. Now, now alleys that go through Rishus Harabim. So it doesn't have to be an alley, although that's what it says here. But most of our streets today, don't have all the requirements of Rishus Harabim. So the Pomim Hem Rishus Harabim, the Pomim Hem Carmelis. Sometimes they are Rishus Harabim, and sometimes it is Carmelis. And there's a multitude of different laws. Why? Because Yesh Oimrim, there's a view. Kol shein shishim riboy anoshim oivrim boy b'chol yoim diglei midbar ein rishus harabim elakamas. There's a view that any street that doesn't have 600,000 people in one day travel through it is not a rishus harabim. So again, other street. I don't know what it's like where you live. mean, I don't think in Phoenix there's any street that has 600,000 people a day. I keep using example Manhattan because there are, some of these long, Broadway and everything, you have 1 million people at a time at peak hour, it's between.
Totally different, right, totally
Yeah.
different.
So,
Yeah.
I'm not sure where everyone lives, whether, perhaps the freeways or different things. So it says, so nowadays, which doesn't really mean nowadays because you lived in the mid 1800s, Ein lon Rosh Hashanah. There's really no Rosh Hashanah. There's pretty much no place that has that many people. V'chol Yerushalayim yachmel atzmoi. But any person that, we should try and be strict in ourselves, even if you don't have the 600,000 people. Okay, so we'll try and sum it up again. At least get the basics. And again, I apologize, it's technical. Shisa Yochid, loosely translated as private domain, means it's private in the respect that the public don't have. It's not a passageway. They don't have access to it to walk through. So it has to be at least 4 by 4 tefachim square, and it has to be fenced either up, down, 10 tefachim away from the ground level, either higher or lower. So it can be a large pillar, it can be enclosed area by fence, it can be a ditch or hole in the ground, any of these things. So that's Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah has to be 16 amos, not tefachim, amos, so about 24 feet square at least, and not fenced in. And according to majority view, 600,000 people traverse it each day. A Carmelis is a Rosh Hashanah missing an ingredient, either size, the amount of people. In number 4, which we won't get to today, it'll have some other things. But it's missing some of the ingredients, so it's not totally Rosh Hashanah. It's a semi Rosh Hashanah. And a Makom Patur is a Rosh Hashanah that's missing ingredients, either size or height. So I think if we just think of those principles, then when we start to get to specific details, it was this big or this high, we can work it out. If we just understand Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah, then we'll realize that anything doesn't fit into these categories. Rosh Hashanah missing some of the requirements is a Carmelis. Whatever it happens to be. So we don't have to memorize all of these different cases, just as long as it doesn't fit that requirement of 4 by 4 and 10 high. Is a Makom Patur. It doesn't fit 16 amos square and the 600,000 people and be open to public thoroughfare, then if it's missing one of those ingredients, it's a Carmelis. So an example of a Carmelis, another example would be, sometimes you have a large thoroughfare, right? And 1 million people go every day, let's say. And there's 2 houses that are set a little bit back from the others, right? Everything's in a straight line. There's 2 houses set a little bit back. So the public could overflow another foot or two, into the that space, but it's inconvenient to do so because it only goes for a few feet. So it's not really, it's missing something. It doesn't have you can't get through. It doesn't have the access, even though it's an extension. All right, I see lots of confused faces. So questions.
No question, but I remember the first time I learned this, what surprised me most is if you're on a lake, what are you on? It's a Shisarabim. It's a Carmelist. The
Yeah,
ocean.
Carmelist. Lake is normally Carmelist. Yeah. Yeah. Well, River's going to have that the next halacha. You know, lucky for me, we had the survey before this one, so people still said I explained that well. If we'd have done this right before the survey, I would have been in trouble.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I just wanted to mention that a lot of people, I mean, we're, the age of, we're not the age of parents, most of us, but they raise kids in a place where there's an Erev where they can carry.
Yeah.
And somewhere the kid's 10 years old, 15 years old, 20 years old, and he starts to go to cities that don't have an Erev, and they don't know what to do. They assume that there's an Erev every place because that's where they were raised and that's how they grew up.
Yeah. Yeah, they have that, and you can have people, not that they don't know you can't carry, but they're so used to dressing in a certain way, like I think we mentioned in previous year, there's certain places where it's fashionable to wear a pocket watch, and that's no problem in an Erev. But then you go outside the Erev, they put on the Shabbos pocket watch, look all fancy, without even thinking that I can't do this in this place where there's no Erev. It's a potential downfall. There's a lot of advantages also to Erev. So it's we have a pretty good Erev here in Phoenix, Baruch Hashem. Good kashrus wise, poor quality wise, in that they literally have to repair it every week. But when it's up and running, so so I have that also. My kids, particularly the younger ones, the older ones would do someone else beforehand, but the younger ones, we're never in a place where you can't carry on Shabbos. Yeah, potential challenge.
Yeah.
All right. So maybe we'll leave it here. We'll do a review. We'll try and find some type of chart, at least make it a little bit easier. And maybe everyone go over it and meditate on it. Maybe not the right word, but it's let it absorb over the week. Absorb in.
Is this going to be on the test?
It's going to be a practical test.
Right.
I have 11 children. So sometimes we have the guests for Shabbos. I mean, some are married, they don't live at home now, but we say to people, the test is you can't leave till you say everyone's name. we never really held anyone to that, but so let's say everything's on the test.
Right.
All right. And you get bonus marks for all my kids' names.
Right.
Rabbi, you're a very good teacher.
Right. You
with a
better
very
feed us the
uh,
names before we
With
leave.
a complicated book to teach us.
Well, we try. Can only do our best.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
So it's so good to have everyone back. I really missed everyone.
You had a lonely life.
Thank you
without
very
us.
much, Rabbi.
Right.
Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Have an amazing Shabbos, and we'll see everyone next
You
week,
too,
God
Rabbi.
willing.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Bye-bye.
Rabbi. Good Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi. Hi,
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
Good
Rabbi.
Shabbos.
Very much, David, for helping me. Thank you.